Hello and welcome. In this section, you will learn about modern JavaScript. JavaScript is a programming language that is based on ECMAScript specifications, which is a standard set by European Computer Manufacturers Association, also known as ECMA. So whenever a new feature is added or updated in ECMAScript, that is reflected in JavaScript. The most recent update is known as ES6, which came to effect in 2016. From now on, ECMAScript will be adding or updating new features to the language on yearly basis. So you will see ES7 in 2017 or ES8 on 2018 and so on. But there will be minor changes. The major changes were made into ES6. So what is changed in ES6? Quite a lot. It has made JavaScript a much better language to work with. We will begin by learning the new features added by ES6 as well as comparing them to the old ways of doing things so that we know the difference and get in-depth understanding of JavaScript. Understanding ES6 is one of the most important things to learn and understand React. In React, you will be writing plain JavaScript along with new features added by ES6. So learning React is like learning JavaScript. Let's say modern JavaScript. Getting better at React means getting better at JavaScript. So let's begin by learning modern JavaScript from the very next lesson. Hello and welcome. In this video, let's begin learning modern JavaScript. Now here I have a folder here, full stack, and it has two files. They are completely empty. In this folder I have on my desktop. So you can go ahead and create a folder and create these two files. And what I've done is I've opened this index.html in my Google Chrome, and I have the DevTools open as well. So let's begin. The first thing, let's go to index.html and create a simple HTML document. And here in the body section, we can create a script tag, and then the source will be index.js. It will be in the same directory. So index.js. And let's start writing some JavaScript here. So let's begin by creating a variable the old school way. Okay, so in JavaScript you would create a variable using var keyword. Var and give it a name. So let's say name variable and give it a value. Let's say Ryan. Okay, now we can simply alert this variable. Now this alert method, let's give name variable as its argument, and let's go check out in the browser. Refresh. As you can see, we get the variable value. All right, so that's how you can create a variable in JavaScript. But how about the value that it holds? Its value can be changed over time. For example, name, let's give it a different value. Let's give Jen, save, and go to the browser and refresh. You see it changed. Okay, so that's how you create variable in JavaScript. Now in JavaScript, variables can hold many different kinds of data. They can hold strings, they can hold integer types, they can hold even the functions as their values, they can hold objects, arrays, all sorts of values they can hold. With ES6, there are two more ways of creating variables: const and let. Okay, so in this video, let's learn about const. So why did we need another method to create a variable when we have this one? Let me show you. If I want to create a variable whose value will not change over time, in that case, how would you create a variable? Before we had only this option, but now we have another option called const. So const lets you create a variable that value cannot be changed. Okay, so let's begin. In fact, we can modify this one. Const name equals Ryan. Now we changed the const here. This shouldn't work. So let's see what sort of error we get in the browser. Refresh. As you can see, oncode type error, assignment to constant variable. So you cannot assign a different value to constant. Okay, so that's the whole point. In a situation like that where you know a certain variable whose value will not change over time, so in such situation you can use const to create variable. Okay, so if I get rid of this one, it should work. Okay, we can alert the name, refresh, it works. Okay, so this is one way of creating variables using const in ES6. In ES6 we have one more way of creating a variable, that is using let. Okay, so why would we use let? Let me show you. For example, let's say we have if statement, so it will check if the condition is true, it will do something. Okay, so let's move this here. Let's get rid of this as well. So if the condition is true, we create a variable. Okay, let's use the var keyword just to show you an example here. So if true, create this variable and alert this variable. Okay, let's save, go to the browser and refresh. We know it works, right? But if we come out of this scope and try to alert here, try to alert this name, this shouldn't work, right? But in JavaScript it works, because when you create a variable using var keyword, it becomes part of the window object. If I comment this out, and if we try to alert this variable, access this variable which is inside the if statement, it still works. As you can see, still works. Now let me show you what I mean by window object. So if you type window in your terminal, in the console, you can see it has, the window object has a lot of properties. Okay, now the one we created, this var, it should be available here as well. We can say window dot name, and you see we get the value of Ryan, because this has become a property of this window object. So we access the property using the dot notation here. Okay, so what if we don't want that? Because in many cases you don't want this to happen. In a larger application, this can be really problematic. There can be a conflict between variable names, right? So you can use the let keyword. Okay, it stays within its surrounding scope using the let keyword. Okay, so if we use let and we try to access the variable created with let outside of the scope, let's see what we get. Refresh. Let me copy this, open in a different tab. Okay, as you can see, it doesn't have anything. Okay, so if I inspect, now if I try window.name, it's empty. That's because it is not being part of the window object. It is not hoisted on top. It is still remained in this scope. Okay, so that's the benefit of using let. Now if we try to alert from within, obviously it works. Refresh, it works. We can change, just like we can change the value of this variable over time using var keyword. Now we can do the same with let as well. So for example, let's change this to Jen. Let's try, refresh, and it works. Okay, so it is recommended to use let instead of var. It has the same characteristics. The benefit is it doesn't get hoisted on top and become part of the window object, so that you can avoid the unexpected results in your application. Okay, in this lecture you will learn about template strings. Okay, so template strings are a better alternative to string concatenation. So I want to show you by example here. So let me create a couple of variables. Let first name, let's give Ryan. Let's create another variable, last name, L name equals to D, and then let's create another variable called age equals to, this time what we're going to do is we're going to prompt the users to input the age. Okay, so let's use this prompt, and then we give a simple message. Yeah, guess Ryan's age. Okay, so we got these three variables: first name, last name, and the age will come from the user input. Okay, now how would we construct the sentence? The old way, let's construct this statement in a variable and let's name it result. Okay, we could say something like first name, and then we use the plus sign to concatenate, right? And then space, and then again plus, and then we could say last name, again plus, again space, again plus, age, again plus, space, years old. It's pretty awful, right? This is the old school way, but luckily we have new way. But this is how we would normally do, right? Let's give it a try. Let's alert this result variable. Okay, let's go to the browser and refresh. Okay, that's because I have this. If I want to use the single quote there, I can simply wrap this with double quotes. Okay, let's save this, refresh. Okay, it is asking for the age. Guess, let's guess 30. Okay, so we get the alert, Ryan D, 30 years old. Okay, so this is how we can concatenate the strings, right? Now let's try using the template string. So let's again create the same variable. Now this time use template string. Now the first thing you need to do is use the backticks. Okay, so these backticks are on your keyboard on the top left corner, right below the escape key. So within backticks we can write whatever we like. We can have space, we can write whatever, anything. So let's construct this sentence. To embed variables inside template string, what you do is you use the $sign and the curly braces. Okay, $sign, curly braces, and here inside you can put variables. Okay, so we want to put the first name, right? And then we want space, right? Now we don't need to worry about plus and space and all that. We can simply have a space, simple as that. First name, and then we can also have another variable, last name, again space, is, and then again another variable age, which will come from the prompt, age, years old. Just like writing plain English. How good is that? And this becomes super useful when you're making API calls. You need to construct the URL. In a situation like that, it is absolute pleasure instead of this. Okay, so this is how you create template string. Now let's give it a try. Result. Okay, let's give it a try. Refresh. Guess Ryan D is 30 years old. So this is how easy it is and very exciting. It is one of my favorite features added in ES6. Alright, so this is your introduction to template strings. Okay, this lesson is about default parameters. So with ES6, you have this ability to pass default parameters, for example, to your function arguments. Okay, so let's begin by creating a simple function and we will go from there. Okay, so function, let's call it welcome, and then it will simply alert. Okay, so I'm going to use the template string, so use 2 backticks. Now within these backticks, I expect, for example, this function expects the user and message. Okay, so let's give these arguments: user, message, and here I'm going to construct a sentence so that I can alert. Okay, so I will say hello. I'll call the user by the user name, so hello user, comma, and then the message. Okay, so this is the function. This function expects 2 arguments, user and message. Let's invoke this function. The first argument is user. Let's give name Ryan to the user, and then message is, let's say, good morning. Okay, so we have a function, we have invoked the function, we have passed the arguments, everything is perfect, it should work. Let's go to the browser, let's refresh. Hello Ryan, good morning. So that's pretty good message. So while using this function, if the arguments are passed, then this function works perfectly, right? But for example, let's imagine that this input would come from the user, and for some reason the user didn't provide the arguments. Okay, didn't provide the name, didn't provide the message. So in such case, what would happen? This function would break, right? If we refresh, hello undefined, undefined. Okay, so in a situation like this, we could benefit by using the default arguments. What we could do is we could simply assign a default value to this one. For example, the user, let's give a default value of mystery person. Okay, and message, let's give a default value of good day. Okay, so in this case, even though there are no arguments passed, this function will not break and it will still function with the default value. Okay, so let's go to the browser and try hello mystery person, good day. So this is much better than undefined, undefined, right? So obviously we can be more creative, but that's not the point. The point is to understand about default parameters, right? So this is how you can use default parameters when you're creating a function, and this is pretty awesome. I hope you like it. With ES6, we can write arrow functions. These arrow functions are a bit different than regular functions. Okay, so let's begin by writing a simple regular function, and then we will try to convert it to arrow function, and we will learn more about arrow functions. Okay, so let's begin by writing a simple function. I'm going to call it greeting, and it will expect 2 arguments, in fact just one, message. Okay, and then it will simply return the alert with that message. So I'm using a template string, message, and we can write everyone. Okay, so if the argument comes as good afternoon, it will simply alert good afternoon everyone, right? Simple. Now let's invoke this function, and let's give the argument of, let's say, good morning. Let's give it a try in the browser. Good morning everyone. So it works as expected. Now this function can be written in one line using arrow function. Okay, so let's do that. First, let me assign it to a variable, greeting, and then arrow functions are like anonymous function without a name, right? So you begin with the parentheses for the arguments. So you don't need the function keyword to create arrow functions. Okay, you begin with parentheses and then you return whatever you like to return. Now the argument that we are taking is message, right? So this will be here. This is what we are returning, right? So this will be here, and that is all we need. So this function can be written using arrow function in one line, like so. Now if it is just one argument, you don't even need the parentheses. What if you have more than one argument? So in that case you would need the parentheses and then you would add more arguments. But if it is just one argument, you don't need the parentheses. Now you also must have noticed that we are not using the return keyword here. That's because with arrow functions, if it is just one statement that you are returning, then you don't need the return keyword. So this is just one statement we are returning, right? So we don't need the return keyword. Okay, so let me comment this out. Now in this example, I'm going to have multiple if statements. Okay, so let's create this arrow function. Let's assign it to a variable, create blog. It will take the argument and it will return multiple statements. Okay, so the argument it will take will be title and body, and here it will have two statements. Okay, so the first statement will be the if statement. It will check if there is no title. Okay, so if there is no title, we want to throw an error. Throw new error object, and we can simply say a title is required. Okay, so in a similar way we can also check for body. So if the body is not there, then we can also throw new error. Body can't be empty. If we get title, if we get body as well, then we can return the blog. Okay, so return, and I'm going to use the template string. Okay, so return title dash body. Okay, now let's invoke this function, create blog. Let's try it like so, without title and body. Let's see what we get. Refresh. As you can see, a title is required, so obviously that works. But let's say if we give the title and let's give the blog body as well. Let's alert. Okay, as you can see, we have the blog return. Okay, so the point here is if you have more than one statement, you can use curly braces, you can use return keyword, but if it is just one statement, you don't need to do all this. Okay, so this is how you write arrow function in ES6. Now if there are no arguments, obviously you can get rid of this and you can simply have the parentheses. Okay, so if you're not expecting any arguments, you can just write it like so. Okay, and we can invoke this function and it works. Okay, so this is how arrow function simplifies things. Now there is one more thing you need to know about arrow functions, that is this keyword. Okay, so we're going to cover that in the next video. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video we're going to learn about arrow function and how they relate to this keyword. Before we understand the relationship between this keyword and the arrow function, we need to understand how it behaves with regular function. Okay, so here I have a simple function with the name of say hi. Now in JavaScript, when you create a function, they become part of the global window object, and that's important to know because when you use this keyword, it refers to the enclosing context. So in this case, you would imagine that when you use this keyword here inside, you would imagine that this refers to the function within these two curly braces, right? And that is true, but because in JavaScript, when you create a function, they become part of the global window object. When you use this, points to the window object. To prove this to you, what we can do is we can simply console log this. Okay, so this is a special keyword. So when we console log this, we are referring to the enclosing context, which is the window object. So let's go and have a look at this. So let me open up the developer tool. As you can see, we are console logging this, which refers to the window object. And if you click here, you will see window object has a lot of properties. So we should be able to see this say hi method available as the property of the window object. Let's have a look. So that begins with S. So let's go. It's in alphabetical order. If you go all the way down to S, as you can see, we have say hi function available as method in this window object. So this refers to the enclosing context, but because the function in JavaScript become part of the window object, this refers to the window object. Okay, so once you understand that, we can see how it works with arrow function. So let me get rid of all this. With this knowledge, let's go ahead and create a simple object that will have its own properties and methods. And on that method, first we will use the regular function, and we will see the problem, and we will solve that problem using arrow function. Create an object, let's call it Nepal. So this will have, let's add some property, add property mountains, and it will be an array of mountains such as Everest, Fishtail, Annapurna. Now let's create a method that will print all these mountains with a dash in between. Okay, so let's add the method. I'm going to call it print with a dash. In JavaScript, you know that functions can be used as the value, right? So this property will have a value of function. Okay, function. Now I'm using the old school function, and here I'm going to use set timeout method that you can use in JavaScript. So set timeout. Now it will take two arguments. The first argument is the function itself, and the second argument is the timing. So first let's create a function. Now what this function will do is it will simply console log this mountains, and what I would like to do is I would like to use this join method. This will simply join all the mountains name with a dash. Okay, so this is the first argument of function itself, and the second argument, comma separated, we can give the timing. So after 3 seconds, this function will invoke itself, the set timeout function. We can try it. Let's alert Nepal, the object and its property. Let's get mountains. Fix this typo. It should be just Everest, and we should have it comma at the end, not the semicolon, right? Because it's just the first property and then followed by the second property. Once we save, we can go to the browser and give it a try, and we can see the mountain's name, right? That's fine. That's the array. But what about print with dash? This method, can we access this method? Let's try print with dash. Now let's give it a try. Let's get rid of the alert here. Okay, so we are accessing the objects method. Okay, so it should print out the console log, the mountain's name in 3 seconds, right? So let's give it a try. So the problem here is it cannot read property join of undefined, which means it doesn't find the mountains. We are referring with this, but this is pointing to somewhere else, not within this context. So we need to understand clearly that this keyword is referring to which context, this context or the outer functions context or the objects context or the window object. We need to find that out, right? We can begin by just comment this out, and then let's console log here, console log this, just to find out when we use this keyword within this function, set timeout function, we want to know where does this point to, right? We can also write here, just for our reference, inside set timeout. Let's go and refresh. Okay, so inside set timeout window, so it is still pointing to the window object when we use this. Now what about we console log here, and let's write this one inside print with dash. So let's find out inside this print with dash method, this anonymous function, when we use this, let's find out where this refers to. Let's save and refresh. Okay, so inside set timeout, that is pointing to the window, but interestingly inside print with dash, it is pointing to the object itself. As you can see, the object has the mountains property and print with the dash function itself. So this can be a bit tricky to understand, but as you can see, JavaScript behaves in a bit weird way. When we use this here, it points to the window object. However, this print with the dash function is a part of this object we used as anonymous function. For that reason, it is pointing to this object, not on the window. So this is where you can benefit by using arrow function, because arrow functions don't have their own enclosing context. So if you use it within another function, in this case this anonymous function which is part of this object, this keyword used inside the arrow function will point to the enclosing or outer function context. Okay, so let's do that. Let's comment this out. Let's comment this out as well. And what we can do is we can use, let's bring it back, let's get rid of this, this problem can be fixed by changing this function, the first argument of this set timeout method. Let's change this to arrow function, and it is pretty straightforward. We can get rid of the function keyword, we can get rid of these curly braces because it's just one statement we're returning, and now all we have to do is use this arrow. Right now we can even put it in one line, so makes more readable. Okay, and let's get rid of this semicolon. So this is all we need to do, because this arrow function don't have their own context. This will refer to this function, this outer function, the wrapping function, and this function, as we know, is part of this object, right? So when you access this object and invoke this method, it will behave properly. Let's save this one and give it a try. Refresh. In 3 seconds we see the outcome. Awesome. So this is important to understand, because in React you will be using this pattern, this way of writing code. Okay, so this is it. This is your introduction to the arrow functions and this keyword. Hello and welcome. Now in this video you're going to learn about ES6 destructuring. So we can break down the object or array structure into variables. Okay, so let's start with this example. Let's create an object and let's name it things to do. So this object, let's say it will have couple of key value pairs, such as, let's say, morning, and morning will do exercise, right? And in the afternoon we'll work, and in the evening, let's say, we code, and at night we do more than one thing. So let's give it a value of array, and we do sleep, and then once we sleep we dream as well, right? Okay, so it's a simple object, and we have a couple of key value pairs, and it holds the value of string, and this time it's the value of array. Okay, so this object, let's say we want to use it, but we don't want to use the evening, we don't want to use the night, we just want to use the morning and afternoon. So there's a better way of using extracting the variables out of the object using destructuring. Okay, so let's say I want to get the morning and afternoon out of this object and don't worry about anything else. So what I can do is I can just create a variable with let and use this object literal syntax and assign it to things to do, right? So now I can start destructuring. So for example, I can destructure the morning out of that object structure. So this is the object structure, and I'm destructuring. Okay, so I just want to take out the morning and afternoon. Okay, now once you do this, you are ready to use these keys as individual variables. Okay, so for example, let's say console log, let's console log morning and afternoon. Okay, with dash in between. Okay, now let's give it a try. So we have these values available as variables to use because we did object destructuring. Okay, so let's give it a try. First, let's go inspect console, and as you can see, we have got the variables extracted, destructured from the object exercise and work. So those are the values these variables hold. Now you can also change their value as well, just like you would do with a regular variable. Okay, so for example, morning, let's say you want to do something else, so don't want to exercise, let's say you want to run, you simply assign the value again, different value, save and give it a refresh, and you see it changed. Okay, so it's pretty flexible and it becomes super useful. And in fact, this way of writing code is all over when you're working with React. Okay, this is a very simple example of object destructuring in ES6. Before I end this video, I want to show you one more example of using object destructuring, and this time with function arguments. Okay, so let's begin by creating a function. Let's name it uni student. Okay, and it will take the student as argument. Okay, this is an arrow function, and it will return, let's console log, and let's build this up. Let's use this template string. Within these two backticks we can use the variables, right? So using the $ and curly braces, let's say student.name, because we are expecting an object, so this object will have name property and the university. Okay, so console log student name from, let's say, this is the old way, by the way, and then I will show you how you can improve it with destructuring. Okay, so let's work with this first. Student dot university. Okay, So we are taking this student object. Let's pass this object via function argument. Okay, so let's use this uni student. This function, it will take the argument student object, right? So this object will have name property with the value of the student name and university property with the value of, let's say, Sydney. Okay, so we have this function and it will take the object as an argument. Now we're not using any destructuring here. This is the old way of doing things, right? Using the dot notation, getting the property out of the object. Okay, so let's see. Let's give it a try. Refresh. Ryan from University of Sydney. Well expected, right? But how can we improve this code using destructuring? So what we can do, we can destructure within this function. Okay, so let's say let's use this destructuring, and we want to destructure the variables from student, right? Okay, and within here, what we want to use, we want to use the name and university, right? So we can say so like name. Now instead of writing like so, all we need to do is we can use the name and we can use the university. We don't need to use the dot notation because we're already destructured, right? So this way it works. So this is the benefit of using destructuring. If you're working with a larger object, this really simplifies your code. Okay, so let's give it a try. Refresh, and it still works. So that's cool, but you can go one step further. What you can do is you can destructure while taking as an argument. So what you can do is, instead of even doing so, you can directly destructure while taking an argument. So you would normally use the parentheses if it is more than one argument, right? So within here, you can apply destructuring while taking it as an argument like so. Okay, so this also works, which is pretty cool. So let's go, give it a try, refresh. As you can see, perfect. Okay, so you can use destructuring in various ways to simplify your code, and this is one of the exciting features added in ES6. Okay, let's learn about destructuring an array. So just like we did with objects in the previous lesson, we can do with arrays as well. So let's say we have an array. So let's say we have an array of mountains. Okay, Everest, Fishtail, Annapurna. Okay, so this is an array of mountains, and let's say I want to get the first one. Okay, so using array destructuring, what you can do is you can simply assign it to a new name, new array. So let's say first mountain. Okay, with this, if you console log first mountain, you will get the Everest because that is the first, right? So let's give it a try, refresh, we get Everest. Okay, now let's say you want to get the second item of the array. So what you would do, like in the old way, you would use like 0 to get the first item, 1 to get the second, and 2 to get the third, right? So this works in a similar fashion. So this is we just named it whatever we like, we can name. I named it first mountain. So let's say I want to get the second item. So what I can do is I can simply comma separate. Okay, so comma separate and don't pass anything there. So in this case, it will skip the first one and give you the second one. Okay, now we can change the name or leave it like so, doesn't matter. Let's give it a try. As you can see, we get the second mountain. Awesome, right? Now let's say you want to get the third one, you can comma separate one more time. Now first item comma, second item comma, so both of them are skipped and you get the third one. Okay, so if you give it a refresh, you see Annapurna. So this is how array destructuring works. Just like destructuring, we can also restructure. Okay, so restructuring is the process of putting back together. For example, with object literal enhancement, we can grab variables from the global scope and turn them into an object. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's see how we can do this. Let's say we have variable name, let's say Everest. Okay, and let's say we have another variable height 8848. Okay, so these two variables are available in the global scope. So let's use these variables to create an object. Okay, so let's say var adventure climbing. Okay, so this is an object and we create this object using these variables, name and height. So this is restructured, and please ignore my linter error. I need to fix this one. Okay, so this is fine. Now let's try console logging this variable adventure climbing. Okay, let's give it a try, and we see an object. We have created a new object. We restructured. Beautiful. So name and height are now keys of this adventure climbing object. We can also create object methods with restructure. So let's create this method. Let's name it, let's create a variable first. Let's call it output, and this will hold the value of function. Okay, this function. Now this function, what it will do, it will console log. Let's use this template literal. So within these two backticks, let's say mount, and we get the mountain's name. So $, within curly braces, let's say this name, okay, is this height meter tall. Okay, now what we can do is we can access this method. So adventure climbing dot output. Okay, we don't need to put inside console log, so we can just invoke this function. So when we invoke this function, it will console log. So let's give it a try. Refresh. Okay, so we forgot to add this one. Save, refresh, and Mount Everest is 8,848 meters tall. Okay, so this is how you can restructure the object, add properties and methods. Now why don't we try putting them all inside this object? Okay, because I want to show you one more thing you can do with ES6. Okay, so let's copy all this, let's put it here, and we need to make some changes. So let's say name, let's get rid of this equal sign, and let's assign the value of Everest, and get rid of the colon and use comma instead. So these are the properties of this object now. Okay, so let's get rid of this, use colon and then use comma. So the first property is the name, second is the height, and the third is this function. So what you could do is you could use this property named output. It would hold the value of function, right? Then get rid of this colon. Okay, so this is how you could create an object, right? This is the old way. Add the name properties and methods. Okay, this is a function. Now we should still be able to access this. That works fine. However, with ES6 you don't need to use this function keyword. Okay, so what you can do is you can get rid of this and use directly like so. Okay, so this is another thing you can do with ES6. Now we can still access this like so. Refresh, it's fine. Hi, how are you doing? Now in this video you're going to learn about a spread operator. It is also used as a rest operator and also as spread operator. So in both cases, what you would do is you would use three dots. Okay, so you can use this to combine two arrays into one, or combine two objects into one. Okay, and when you combine, it does not modify or mutate the original source. So the original array or object stays as it is. It doesn't get modified. Rather, we create a new instance, new object or new array. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's create a simple example, and we use these spread operator on arrays and object as well. Okay, so let's begin with arrays. Let's create a variable. Let's call it mountains. Okay, and then let's create this array and let's add a couple of mountains. Okay, Everest, Fistel, and Annapurna. Okay, so we got three mountains in this array. Now let's say we got more mountains. We got another variable that contains some other another array with more mountains. Okay, so let's say variable mountains from Japan. Let's say Fuji. Now it can have more, but let's just keep Fuji because I don't know any other name of the mountains from Japan. Okay, so we got the mountains variable which contains three mountains, and this variable contains one more. So total we got four mountains. Okay, so what I would like to do is I would like to create a new variable that contains both of these. Okay, so using spread operator, what we can do is let's say var all mountains equals to this array. It will spread out all the contents of the mountains. Okay, mountains, and also we spread out the mountains from Japan. Okay, so now this variable contains this array mountains and this array using these three dots comma separated. Okay, now if you console log all mountains, what we see is we see all these mountains from the first variable and the Fuji as well, the second variable. So this will become very useful when you're working in an actual application. For example, let's say you have a state that contains a certain data, and then you might get additional data from the API. You make API request and you get more data. Okay, so you might want to combine both data and render into your application, right? In a situation like that, it can become very useful. Now let's try using it on object as well. We did this on array. Now let's try on objects. Let's create a variable called day. This is an object, and this will have, let's say, breakfast. This will contain the breakfast food. Let's say toast with milk. Okay, and then let's say lunch. Let's say rice with chicken curry. Okay, so this object contains breakfast and lunch, and let's say we get one more object variable, let's say night, and let's say this one contains dinner, noodle soup. Okay, so we got these two objects. So what we want to do is we want to combine both of these objects and produce a new object. Okay, so what we can do is we can, let's say we are doing this for picnic. Okay, so we want to take all the foods we would eat in a day to our picnic. So using these three dots, we can use on day object, and then we can also use on night object. Okay, Now console log picnic. Let's see what we get. Okay, we're missing one more. Okay, so make sure we have 3. Save, refresh, and as you can see, we get one single object which contains a breakfast, dinner, and lunch. So this becomes extremely useful in real-world application. Now let me create one more object, one more example, and this example will show you how you can use it to get the rest of the elements. Okay, so these 3 dots can be used as a spread as well as a rest. So let's have a look at the rest side of it. Okay, so let's create a variable called rivers. So this is an array, and this will contain a couple of rivers: Sunkosi, Tamakosi, Saptakosi. Okay, so we got these 3 rivers. Now let's say I want to get the first one and the rest. Okay, so what you can do is you can use create a variable using the array destructuring, and what you can do is you can say first you want to get the first, and then you want to get 3 dot rest. Okay, now what you can do, you can console log, and let's say we want to see the first one only. Okay, so let's see, we get only the first one, Sunkosi. Now if we want to get the rest, we can do rest, so this would give us the rest, not the first one, right? So refresh, as you can see, we got the rest but not the first one. And this works exactly the same way in an object as well. So this is how we can use these 3 dots as rest or spread operator in ES6. Hi, how are you doing? Now in this video you're going to learn about classes. Okay, so in JavaScript previously there was no official classes in JavaScript. So what we could do is we could create a function and add methods on that function object, okay, using the prototype. So one thing you should know, that in JavaScript functions are objects. Whenever you create an object, the prototype object is also created behind the scene. So using this prototype we could create something like class. Okay, so this is how we would do previously. So let's do it so we get better understanding of how classes works in JavaScript. Okay, so let's create this simple function. Let's call it holiday. Let's make it capital. Function holiday, and let's say it will take 2 arguments, destination and let's say days. Okay, now we could refer using this keyword, this destination. So this destination equals to destination, this days equals to days. Okay, so this is a function we have here. Now what we could do is we could add a method to this function using prototype. So what you could do, you could say holiday dot prototype. Okay, access this holiday functions prototype object and add info into it. So this is a function, and this function could do something. For example, let's console log, let's say this, then destination plus, let's use this pipe symbol, plus this days plus days. Okay, so let's try using this variable. Let's say Nepal equals to, let's create a new instance of it, new holiday. Okay, and we can pass the arguments say Nepal is the destination and days, let's say 30. Okay, so console log Nepal, and we want to access the method info, right, out of Nepal. So we create a function, we added this method to this function, and we create a new instance of it, and then we console log and we access this new functions, this method. Okay, so let's save, give it a try. Let's make sure it's small letter, save. Okay, so Nepal 30 days. Okay, so this is how you would add method to the function object, right? Now there's a better way of creating classes in ES6, so let's give that a try. Let's get rid of this. So let's create this class holiday. Okay, now before we add any properties or methods, let's see how it works. Let's console log this holiday class. Okay, so we get this object. Okay, that's expected, but now we're not going to use prototype like we did before. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use the constructor. Okay, so what is constructor? Just to make you understand what is constructor, I'm going to use console log holiday dot prototype. Okay, so like I told you earlier, when we create a function, this prototype object is created behind the scene. Now even though this is a class, this is technically a function behind the scene, and in JavaScript functions are objects. Okay, so let's give it a try. Let's see what it holds. Holiday.prototype. Let's save, let's refresh, and as you can see, we have this object with constructor. Okay, so it can take the arguments. So constructor, that's how it works. So it is part of the prototype object that is created behind the scene and ready for us to use. What we can do is we can call this constructor inside this class and set the properties. Okay, so what we can do is constructor. Now inside here, what we can say is we can first, it will take the arguments destination and days, just like we did earlier, and we can set this destination equals to destination and this days equals to days. Okay, so whenever we create a new instance of this holiday using the new keyword and pass in the arguments, that will be available here, and this class, this constructor method will set the arguments as property to this class. Okay, now once we have the properties, we can also add more methods. So let's say we have info method, and this will simply console log. Let's use this backtick. Okay, let's say this destination will take this days. Okay, so this is how we can create a class. We add properties, we add methods. Now we can use this class as many times as we need. For example, let's create const trip equals to new using this new keyword. Let's instantiate this class new holiday, and let's give it an argument. Let's say Nepal. Let's give actually Kathmandu, Nepal, and then the days, let's give 30. Okay, now we can see console log trip, and we want to access its method info, right? Let's invoke this here. Let's save, go here, refresh. Kathmandu, Nepal will take 30 days. Okay, so this is how we can create classes in ES6. Use the constructor to set the properties, and we add methods like so, and we can reuse it using this new keyword. We can instantiate as many times as we need. Now let's go one step further and let's see how we can extend from one class to another. Okay, so children class can extend from parent class so that all these properties and methods from the parent class are available to the children class when the children extends to this parent class. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Let's get rid of this. So we have this class. Let's treat it as super class or parent class. Okay, let's just comment here, and then the children class, we can name them subclass. Okay, so they are known as superclass and subclass. Okay, so let's create another class that will extend from holiday. So let's say class expedition extends holiday. Okay, so the first thing we can do is we can call the constructor, so it will take the argument of destination days, and as well as let's add one more thing, let's add some gear as well. Okay, so that's the whole point of we are extending, because we want to add this gear property. Okay, so what we can do is we don't need to say again this destination, this days, because we are extending from this class. So these properties are available here because it's extending. So all we need to do is super and then destination and then days. So what's happening here is we are calling the super class, the parent class, and passing the arguments to the parent class. So they will be processed here. When we instantiate this expedition class, we will get the arguments of destination, days, and gear, but destination and days, we are passing it to parent for the handling. So in other classical object-oriented languages, you would use parent keyword. In JavaScript, this is how you do, use this super. Okay, so constructor super, pass it to the super class, and this class, this expedition, will only handle the gear. Okay, so it will set the gear property to on its own. Now we can still access the info method from the parent class, the super class holiday, right? So what we can do is we can use this and here we can access this super info. So this method exactly the way it outputs, so we can use that, and we can also add our own console log. Okay, so this is how we can override the method. We're extending from the parent, so we still using this info method, but we are overriding. So we taking everything there is, it is outputting, we using that, and we are adding additional information as well. So console log, let's say bring your gears as well. So what we can do, let's use this backticks, bring your this gear, and what we can do is we can join. Okay, so let's join this gear dot, let's use this join method, okay, with and here. Okay, now let's try this const, let's create a new instance of this new expedition. Let's name it const trip with gear. Okay, so let's say new expedition, and let's give the arguments. So the arguments, the first one will be the destination, let's say Everest, and days, let's say 30, and then let's say we pass in the gear, the array of items, okay, as our gear. So let's say sunglasses, let's say flags, let's say camera. So this is the superclass. This subclass is extending the superclass, and we instantiating it here. Let's trip with gear dot info. Let's try accessing this method. So let's give it a try. Okay, so airbrush will take 30 days. So that is the output of this parent info class, info method. And we also added bring your sunglasses and your flags and your camera. Okay, so these are the gears we added. So when we instantiate this new class, we get whatever it inherits from the parent as well as new console log. Okay, so the point here is this is how we can create a class in AJAX. We can another subclass can extend, and we still set the constructor. We use a super to access the superclass or the parent class. Okay, and this is how we work with classes in AJAX. Okay, so now this is important because this is how you would be working in React. Okay, you would be setting the constructor properties, super properties, and that's how you will go. You will add the methods like so. All right, so with this you would be very comfortable getting started with React. Hello there, how are you doing? Now in this section you're going to learn about the basics of React. Now before we combine React with a Laravel, it's a good practice to just learn React on its own. It's going to be pretty similar, but this will be a bit easier to learn. Okay, so let's begin by installing React. The first thing, you need to make sure that you have Node installed. Okay, so if you don't have Node installed in your computer, you can simply go to nodejs.org and you can download either for Mac or Windows. Okay, so once you do that, if you go to your terminal, you can type node-v for node version and you'll see a node version. So if you see this, that means you have Node installed in your computer. So once you have that, what we can do is we can go to React.js.org and we just need to install React using, let me go through get started. Let's go to installation. Okay, we can use CDN links as well, but obviously you wouldn't use that. So let's go do it straight away. So what we can do is we can install this create React app. It is the best way to start building new React applications, single page applications. Okay, so we just need to run this command. So this will install this create React app globally -z. Okay, so let's go and paste that command and hit enter. Okay, I get this error. I just need to run sudo okay. So once that is done, we are ready to create new React projects just by running this command create React app and the name, whatever you like to call it. Okay, so let's begin. Now before we do anything, let's decide where we want to create this application, right? So you might want to create on your desktop or some folders. You can create anywhere because we have installed this globally, so it is available anywhere in your computer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have a couple of folders in my root directory and there is one called React. So if you don't have, you can create one in your root. Okay, so let's change directory cd into React, list all the files. I have all these files. I'm going to create one more. So this time using this command that we just installed, create React app. Let's name it, what do we call it? Let's say La React. Okay, let's do that. So it will take some time. So once it is done, I'll be back. Okay, so once it is done, you'll get this beautiful messages here. You can run yarn start to start the application, yarn build to build this application before you deploy it to your production. Okay, if you're running the test, you can use this yarn test, and if you run this yarn eject, what it will do is this create React app is a the kind of a packaged, well packaged system. So if you want to break it out, you would run yarn eject. Okay, so you might not want to do that. And then since we have this already installed, we can cd into La React. Okay, cd into there, and then we can run this application using this yarn start. Now everywhere you see yarn, you can simply use npm as well. Okay, so npm or yarn, whichever you prefer. Okay, so let's cd into this one, and then let's say yarn start, or you can use npm start as well. Okay, so once you do that, this will open. Now I have already another application running, so it is asking me to another port. I'll just hit enter. Okay, and there we have our freshly installed React application. Okay, so in this video we just installed React. Now in the next video, let's have a look inside this directory. Let's introduce ourselves into files and folder structures. Okay, so let's do that in the next video. Thank you. Hello, how are you doing? Now in the last video we were able to create a fresh install of React, right? And in this video we're going to have a look in the file and folder structure. So what I did is I just opened in Sublime Text. So this is where we install. So I was installing this in my root directory inside this React folder, and I named it La React, and this is the folder I'm opening in Sublime Text. Okay, so the first thing you might want to find out is where this is coming from, right? So welcome to React, and this text, where it's coming from. Okay, so where it's coming from is, if you go, and this is the folder structure, and then most of the time we will be working inside this source folder. Okay, so if you go inside, you see all these files. The one we're interested in is this index.js. Okay, so what is happening here? You see React and React DOM are being imported. So this import is ES6 feature. So when you import a package like this, you don't need to specify the directory like so. Okay, so you just give the package name, and it goes looking for these packages in node modules folder directly. Okay, so if you go down, you will find React and React DOM packages as well, along with hundreds of other packages, because they all depend on each other. So it is huge. Okay, so we are importing the index.css as well, which is here. Okay, and we are importing the app, which we will look, and this one, import register service workers. So this comes with this React installation by default, and what we're doing is we are rendering this app component. Okay, so this is, we are importing from here. This is the app.js, so we don't need to say .js. Okay, we just need to give the first name. So we are importing this app component, and we are rendering using this React DOM .render method. Okay, so as you can see, this render method takes two arguments. This is the first argument, this is the second argument. So the first argument is the component itself. So which component you want to render, right? So in this case, this is the app component, and where you want to render, and this is the place where you want to render. Okay, now what is happening here is it is being rendered in a div with ID of root. Okay, now this leaves inside this public folder. So if you go inside public folder, we have index.html. Now this index.html doesn't have many things. Let's get rid of this comment just so that it is easy to read. Okay, so let's get rid of the comment. So this one has this simple head section, and it has this div with ID of root. Now this is where the entire React application is being rendered. Okay, so this is what you see here. So if you go right click on the page source, this is all we see. Okay, because the React application is being rendered in this div with ID of root. Okay, so let's have a look at this application now. Right, let's do that. Let's go to app.js, and this is what is being rendered in the front page, this one. Okay, so what is happening here is just we are importing React as well as component, and then we are importing the logo as well from logo.svg, right? So this is the one, and we are importing app.css. It's pretty basic. Now we have this class, and we have this render method. Now this is one of the React lifecycle method. Okay, there are a couple of more, and we're going to learn them step by step. So this method, what it does is it renders. Now this code looks exactly like HTML, but this is JSX. Okay, so JSX is simply a mixture of HTML and JavaScript. Now this is how you create components in React. You mix JavaScript with HTML like this syntax. It's very easy to understand and get started because it's just like writing HTML, and in between you can embed JavaScript using these two curly braces. So this class app is extending the component, the component that is coming from the React. Okay, and using this render method we are returning this JSX. Okay, so it has logo, it has the header, welcome to React, and it has some code. This is what you see here. Okay, so let's get rid of this. In fact, let's try changing it. Okay, let's change this and have a look. So as soon as the React component changes, okay, it will reload the application automatically. Okay, we are working in a small screen, but you will see as soon as I save, I don't need to reload, refresh, or anything. It just happens. Okay, as you can see, the change is reflected directly. Now we don't really need the logo and CSS, so let's get rid of this and make it simplified so that we can start writing our own code. Okay, so let's just have this div and let's just write we will be back. Okay, let's save, refresh, it's gone, we'll be back. Okay, so we will be back in the next video and we will start writing some React code. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Hello, how are you doing? Now in this video we're going to write some React code. Okay, but before we do that, let's get rid of all these CSS we don't really need. If we need, we can create later, right? We're not going to run the test, so let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of the logo. Okay, and let's just keep, this is the main file, index.js. Okay, and this is the only one component we have. Okay, now let's go here, let's get rid of the index reference here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's fine. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to make an API call, because I don't really like to hardcode write some data and then just write something here to play around, because I don't really like to work with dummy data. Because when you're working in a real world environment, you will be making API calls, you're getting the data from the API, and you will be rendering and all that stuff, right? Now when you work with the local data like so, it works, but it's different than making an API call, because that takes few seconds to come. So during that time the data is not available in your component, and then when you want to render, you don't see the data, you get an error and you get frustrated. Okay, so I'm not going to use this hard-coded data. Instead, I'm going to directly make an API call to the open source API we have available. I'm going to use the one that is called random uses, so that we can get the random uses and play around with that data. Okay, so to make an API call, the first thing I need is some kind of the library to make AJAX call easier. Okay, so we're not going to use jQuery. Obviously, it doesn't make sense to work with React. So what we can do is we can use this Axios. So Axios, if you haven't heard about Axios, it is, let's go have a look. So it is a promise-based HTTP client. Okay, so we can use Axios to make API calls. Okay, and it makes it really easy because it is a promise-based. We can chain using .then, and we can catch the errors using the catch method. Okay, so let's give it a try. First thing we need is we need to install this package, right? So let's install here using either npm or yarn. You can run npm install Axios. I'm going to use yarn add Axios. Okay. Okay, so once it is done, it's ready to use. Let's bring our application to the start status. Okay, and then I can import Axios from Axios. Okay, because this is a package, I don't need to give the path like so. Okay, now the very first thing we need is we need to be able to hold the data in the local component. Okay, so in React we call it a state. So the state will hold the data. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a constructor props super props. So we know that ES6 class component can use a constructor to initialize internal component state. Okay, so what you're trying to do is we're trying to create a state. Okay, so you do that using this dot state equals to this object, and you can add properties. Okay, so in this case we will try to add the users. Okay, we will make an API call, get all the users and store in our local state so that we can play around with this data. So currently it is empty, obviously, because we haven't made any API calls, but once we do, this array will be filled with the users data. Okay, so this is how you begin. Okay, so you create a constructor super. Inside here, inside the constructor, you create a state, and based on the application you're building, you add the properties and the value they hold. Okay, so for the moment it's empty. Now we need to make an API call and store that data in the state users. Okay, so here I can use one of the React's lifecycle method that is called component will mount. Okay, so this method comes with React. Now this method is useful when you want to make some API calls just before the component mounts. It says will mount, right? So just before the component mounts, we can use this method. And there is another one that is also super useful, that is called component did mount. So this is before the component mounts. Component did mount is right after the component mounted. Okay, so these two are mostly used, and there are few of the other ones as well. Now just before the component will mount, I want to make an API call using this Axios library. Okay, so let's use this Axios. Now here we can pass the URL. Okay, so which URL you are trying to make an API call. So that one is here. Okay, so this is api.randomuser.me, and what nationality is US, and results we want 5. Okay, so let's copy this. This is an open source API, so you don't need to register, get client ID or anything, so it's very good to use. So let's copy this and come here and let's paste here. So this is the API, this is the URL that we want to make an API call. Then, because this is Axios is promise based, okay, so we get to use then. So once we make a call, then we get response, right? Response, and using this arrow function, let's console log the response so that we can see what we get. Let's fix this typo. Okay, let's go, and we get the response as you can see in our console. Beautiful. So this response contains the data. Inside this data we have results of 5 items in an array. So this results contains, it is an array and it contains 5 users. Beautiful. Okay, so what we can do now that we have this data, we can put this data in the states users array. Okay, so how we do that is by using this method called setState. In React, every time you want to make changes or update the state, you always use setState method. Okay, that is the only way React knows that state has been changed, and it will re-render the application with the changes. Okay, so use then response. Now using this arrow function, what we can do is this setState method. Okay, so this is important. Every time you want to make change to the state, you use this. You don't directly modify, instead you use this. You don't use the push method or anything like that. You just use setState. Okay, because we don't want to mutate the state, we just want to create a new object so the old data is not overwritten. Okay, so this setState, now what you're trying to do here, we want to give an object, right? So within this object, the key is users, the value currently it's empty, but now we have the value, so we can set the value using response. And if you see here, it's a response.data.results, right? So users, the value will be response.data.results. Okay, so because this component will mount method runs automatically, we don't have to invoke this function. Okay, so as soon as the component, before it mounts, it runs, it makes an API call and it sets the state, so the users will have the users data. So if you refresh, let's save this one, refresh. Okay, we don't see anything because we're not console logging. So what we can do is, if you don't have this React Dev Tools, Chrome, make sure you install this one. It is super useful when you're developing. Okay, so I have already added, so if you don't have it, just add it, and maybe you need to restart your browser. Okay, so once you do that, what you will see is, you will see this React tab here. Okay, and as you can see on the right side, you see the state, and the state has the users, 5 items in it. Beautiful. Okay, so we have the users in our state. Now what we can do is we can loop through all the users that are available in the state and render in our application. So using this render method, we can render all the users using AJAX. So let's do that in the next video. Thank you. Hello, how are you doing? Now in this video, we have all the users available in our local state, so let's render them. Okay, so inside this render method, what we can do is, let's get rid of this and let's write here. So we're going to embed JavaScript, right? So within these two curly braces, okay, within here, what we can say is this state users, right? This state users dot map. Okay, so we use this method map. It will map out each items available. Okay, so let's say user, and using this arrow function, let's return inside div. Okay, now again within these two curly braces, so anytime you want to embed the JavaScript expression, you make sure you do it inside the curly braces. Okay, so this state uses map each user and return user dot. Now what can we return? Let's have a look. So each users, they have cell phone, date of birth, email, ID, and so on. Let's begin with cell phone. Okay, user cell, easy. So we are rendering each users, and this time we're just displaying the cell. Okay, let's have a look. As you can see, we are able to display the user's data. How cool is that, right? Okay, so this is how you can use map method to render the data that is available in the state. Now we can obviously import Bootstrap, put in this file, put inside public index, okay, and we can start using Bootstrap styling, but let's not worry about styling for this application. We just want to learn the basics, right? Now one thing you will notice that here, even though it is pretty much similar to HTML, there are a couple of things such as class. So you don't do class, you just do class name. Okay, that is one thing that most of the time it is used. So very soon you'll get used to it. But beside that, can't think of anything else. So it's pretty much similar to HTML. Okay. So before we can render more elements, we can go ahead and do that using this. Let's bring it down. Okay, so for each user we are rendering the user cell. We can add more items, obviously. Maybe we want to render the name, right? So what's the name here? Let's have a look. So name, and they have first, last, and all that. So name first, and we can concat last. Okay, so let's do that. User name first. Okay, let's save. Okay, that's the first name. Maybe we want to put inside h2 or maybe h3. Okay, and let's create some more, and within p tag. Okay, so within this curly brace, let's say user email. What else we have? And let's say horizontal line. Okay, after each users. Okay, so that's the username, that's the email address, and so on. Obviously you can do more, but we got the basic idea, right? So the next thing I want to show you is how do you extract, because writing this method like so inside component is not always efficient or the best way. Okay, so these API calls you might want to execute from other functions as well later down the road. So let's extract this outside of this component and see how it works. Okay, so what I can do is I can simply name this. What do we call it? Let's call it get users. Okay, now this method will do exactly this. Okay, let's copy this and paste here. Okay, now component will mount, we can simply invoke this method, right? Okay, so this, okay, so this becomes maintainable in the long run. So instead of writing everything inside, we just extract it out. Okay, so let's save and give it a try, refresh. Okay, so it works. that this is an API call, so no matter how fast it is, obviously there are few milliseconds at least that time we don't see any data, and then we get the data, right? If you refresh, what we can do is that time we can show the loading, some kind of loading state, and then once we get the data, we show the data. So let's implement this loading feature in the next video. All right, see you in the next video. Thank you. Hello, how are you doing? Now in this video, let's work on this loading component. So when the data is not available, we will show the loading. Otherwise, we will render the list of users. Okay. So in this lesson, you will learn about conditional rendering. So let's begin by comma separate. Let's add this property to the state loading, and by default, let's make it false. Okay. So by default, loading will not be true; it will be false. Now what we can do is when we make the API call, first what we do is we set the state loading to true. Okay, so just before we make the call. So we can do that using set state method. So make sure to do everything using the set state if you want to modify the state. Okay, so this set state loading, let's make it true. When we make the call, just before that, set to true, but once we get the response, again, we set it to false. Okay. So before we get the data, we set to true. Once we get the response, we set it to false. Beautiful. Now, we can apply the conditional rendering here. Okay, using the ternary operator. There are a few other ways, but we can do that. In fact, let me show you this one first. So this state loading, so by default it will be true, right? So this will check using this AND operator. So this state loading and everything else. So in this case, what happens is if this is true, then it will render. If it is false, then we don't see anything. It doesn't execute. Okay, so only if it is true, it will execute. So let's see if the loading state is true, it will run. Okay, let's give it a try. Refresh, we don't see anything. Okay, so instead what we can do is we can say this state loading what? In fact, let me show you this one. What if I do the negative? Okay, if I apply if state loading is not true, so in that case we see, okay, we see that. Now this is not really helpful here, so what I can do is get rid of this one. So we can use ternary operator here. So this state loading what? If it is true, all this will run until here. Okay, so all this will run. Now if it is false, because everything is within these curly braces, as you can see. So if it is true, run this. If it is false, maybe we can say show the loading, right? We could create a new component, but let's not do that yet. Let's just show the text. Okay. So what we're doing is checking using the ternary operator. If the loading is true, in fact, we have to make sure this is not true. If loading is not true, if loading is false, then display the list of users, otherwise display loading. Okay, let's go here. So it is showing, but if I refresh, okay, for very few milliseconds you see loading here. See that? Loading. Beautiful. So this is how you can apply conditional rendering in React. Now in the next video, maybe we can create another component for loading. Okay, maybe we can create a loading component and we can pass certain data to the loading component, and how it works, how we can pass data from the parent component to the children component. Okay, so let's see how it all works in the next video. All right, see you in the next video. Thank you. Hello, how are you doing? Now in this video, let's learn about creating a separate component and how you can use that separate component all together. Okay, so let's go ahead and create another component here inside source folder, and let's name it loading.js. And as you can see, the capital letter, this is the convention, okay, used in all the components. Okay, so we got the loading component. The first thing we need to do is we need to make sure we have React in the scope. So import React from React, okay, and then this time we don't need to create a class component. Okay, we can use a functional component, a simple component, because class is useful when you want to use all these states. Okay, you want the constructor, you want to create a state, you want to bind the methods. For all that stuff, you want to use the lifecycle methods. So in that case, you would use class component. But for simple data input output, you can use a simple stateless component. Okay, these are called stateful. Class components are called stateful. These are called stateless. Okay, so let's create one const. Let's name it loading equals to, it will take, this is the arrow function. Okay, the arguments, there's nothing to take any argument, and it will simply return, let's return the loading text in h2. Okay, now this is our component. It's a dead simple stateless component. Now we can do export default loading. Okay, now this loading component is available to use in any other component. We just need to import. Okay, so let's go ahead in app.js, let's import that. Import from, it's in the same directory, so /loading. Okay, so now we are importing. Instead of down here, instead of showing this text, what I can do is I can render this component. Okay, loading, and make sure to close like so. Okay, it's very important. Okay, so now what we did, we created a separate component, loading component. It's just very simple. It just returns the h2. We import that in our app.js, and instead of hard coding the text, we rendered. So in this case, if the loading state is false, we render this list of users, otherwise we display the loading component. Okay, let's see how it works. So refresh, as you can see, the h2 loading, otherwise it works perfectly fine. Beautiful. Okay, so now I want to show you a couple of more things about this import export. So what we did here is we just have one component here. Sometimes you can create many components. Okay, so what you can do is that time you can have export const loading, and then you might have, sorry, this one, you can have one export like so, another one like so, another one like so. You can have many components. In a situation like that, you wouldn't use export default. Okay, in that case you would just get rid of this because you are exporting many. So if you have only one, then you would use export default. Otherwise, if you have many, you don't do export default, you just do like so. Okay, so let's try. Even on one we can try. So export const. Now we're not doing export default, we're doing export const. Now if you go here, you see the error. So export default was not found. Okay, so that's what happens when we are exporting like so. But in a situation like this, how do you use that? What you can do is go back to app.js, and instead of importing like this, if it was a default export, it would work like this. But since it is different, what you do is you wrap this within the curly braces, just like you saw here. You do this. Okay, so this is a destructure. Now if you go, it works fine that way. Okay, so if you are exporting more than one constant, you might do like this, and when you import such constants, you use this syntax. Okay, now let me put it back the way it was, just for simplicity. Okay, save. Okay, it works fine. Now one more thing, in a situation you need to have multiple components to work with the main component. For example, this is the main component. Okay, so it need to render a lot of different things. Now it is only showing the loading, the one additional, but later you might want to show many items. So in that case, you can create many other components and use like so. It simplifies your code, and these components can be reusable as well. Okay, so in a situation like that, what you would do is you would create a component and you would pass the properties from here. Okay, so another component might pass another different property to this component, so this component can be reusable that time. Okay, so in this example, let's keep it very simple and let's pass the message. So when loading component loads, you want to display a different message. Let's give the message of, let's say, hey. Okay, so this is the message we are giving to this component. So this is the property for this component. Okay, now this component can get this property. If you go here, as you can see here, props, and here what you can do is you can say props message. Okay, now still works perfectly fine. As you can see, the message is being displayed there. Beautiful. Now you can even go one step further and you can destructure the property when in the function argument itself. Okay, so previously it was like that. Now instead of taking the props, we can directly destructure here. So what we're trying to get, we're trying to get the message, right? So you can simply say message here, and then here directly, instead of props and all that, you just do directly. And this, I like this way. This is much more simpler as well. Okay, so this way also it works. So you can see, refresh, beautiful. Now this loading component can be reusable. For example, now in this case, this app component is using this loading component and it is passing its own message. Now let's imagine another component you might create later. That time also you might want to show the loading component, but that time you might want to display a different message. For example, your shopping cart is being loaded or something like that, right? So you can pass different properties from different components, but this component can always stay the same as long as you keep the naming convention properly, use the message. It can always stay the same and it can be reusable. Okay, now instead of message, you can also pass the properties of the state. You could simply say message equals to this state and whatever you want to pass down, right? And that data could be rendered in a separate component. Okay, so the possibilities are endless. So just it's a general concept. You can pass the properties like so. Okay, so this is it for this lesson. Let's learn some more about React basics, and then we are ready to dive into Laravel with React. Okay, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Hello, how are you doing? Now in this video, let's learn about handling click events. Okay, so here we are rendering all the users. Now on each user, let's add a simple form. Okay, just for learning purpose, let's create a form. Let's close this form tag. Okay, so this form will have input, and make sure to always close like so. Okay, it's very important. So input type, let's say type submit. Okay, and then value, let's say load users. Okay, so when this form, when this input, this submit will be clicked on this button, right, it will load more users. Okay, that's what we're trying to do. Okay, so form on submit, we can use this method. So on submit, what we can do is we can execute a certain function. Okay, so for example, let's say we're going to create a new function. Let's name that handle submit. Okay, so this handle submit. So we haven't created this yet, we will create now. Okay, so all we did is create a simple form with the input type of submit. The value is the load users, and then when this will be clicked, it will execute this function. Okay, so let's save this one. Let's go here. Okay, we got the button, that's great. Now let's work on this method. Okay, so handle submit, we can go on top. Let's create here handle submit. First thing we want to do is we want to prevent the default behavior. So when you click, it will reload the page. We don't want that, right? So handle submit event prevent default. Okay, once we do that, what we can do is we can, let's say, in fact what we're trying to do is we're trying to make an API call to load more users, right? So let's do that. All we need to do is execute this function, right? So handle submit prevent the default behavior and then load the users. Make sure you have this. So execute this function. Once you do that, console log just more users loaded. Okay, just for our reference. Okay, so we have this function. When this is clicked, when this is submit, this method will run. It will prevent the default behavior, and then it will execute this get users method. Okay, so let's go here, give it a refresh. Let's try. So it's reloading the page because I did a typo here. What I did is I misspelled it, SUBMIT. Okay, submit, make sure you get it right. From on submit, we execute this method. This will prevent the default behavior, it will get more users. Okay, let's give it a try. Load users, and as you can see, cannot read property get users from undefined, and that's because we need to bind this method because this class doesn't know. Okay, so when I said this, it doesn't know. So what I need to do is I need to bind. So right after this state inside this constructor, anytime you create a new function, you need to bind. Okay, so this handle submit, right? Handle submit equals to this handle submit bind. So this bind method we use. Now this method will bind this method to this class itself. Okay, now if you go refresh, load users, as you can see, page is not refreshing, it is just showing loading because we're getting the more data, but page is not reloading. Okay, beautiful. Now what we could also do is we could, every time we get load more users, we could merge that new data to the old data in the state, right? But let's not do all that stuff because we're going to work in a real project anyway. I just wanted to show you how this the click events works in React. Okay, so let's not work on this one. In fact, we're going to do all this in the real project later down the road. Okay, but we can even do it. It's not that difficult. Okay, let's do it actually. So every time we click, we get more data, which we load the data, right? We execute this method. So what we can do is, it is setting the state on based on each response. Now what I can do is, just like we learned using the spread operator, okay, so what we can do is uses, now keep it inside an array. So first we will take all the users that are already exist in the state. Now in this case it would already be some users there in the state, right? So we can use this three dots spread operator. So we can say this state users. So we take the existing users, if there are any, from the state, and then we merge with the rest of the users that are coming from the response after making each API request. Okay, so using this array spread operator, we can merge the data, merge the users. So every time we click, we load more data. Okay, so we have 5. Now if I load, we have 10. If I load again, we have more, okay. So this is how it works. All right, so if you go page source, inspect, see the state, okay, you saw it's 20, okay, it's 25, it's so on. Okay, so that's how we can merge the state, merge the data in the local state as well. It's pretty cool, right? Now this becomes super useful in real world application. When you're building a real world application, these tricks are really helpful. Okay, so you're learning quite a lot. Now let's do a few more small steps in the next video, then we will be done with the React basics. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Hello, how are you doing? Now we're learning quite a lot React basics. Okay, so now there's one more thing I want to show you. That is, if you notice, we have a lot of repetition with this state, this state, this state, right? So we can fix this using this object destructuring. So what you can do here, let's say const equals to this state. Okay, so what are we getting from the state? We're getting the loading. Okay, loading, we're getting users, okay, and that's all we're getting. Okay, now what we can do is we can simply use this loading. We don't need to repeat this loading all the time because we have already destructured. Okay, so these variables are available for us to use and they refer to the state. Okay, so let's get rid of this state. Let's get rid of this state. Okay, let's save this one and this should work. Okay, beautiful. Refresh, everything is working fine. Beautiful. Okay, so that's quick and easy fix, and that simplifies our code. Okay, let's do one more thing. That is, we can also use inline styling. Okay, so let's try on user first, this heading. Okay, so let's say you want to apply some inline styling. How would you do that in React? You would do just like this, style, and within 2 curly braces. Okay, let's change the color red. Okay, so this is how we can apply inline styling. Let's go refresh, and as you can see, the heading color is changed. You must have also noticed that you're getting this error, each child in an array should have a unique key. That's because in React you need to make sure that each element have the unique ID. Okay, so in our case we have this div that is rendering each user's email and this form. So this div needs to have a unique ID. So what we can do is we can pass this key like so, and we pass the user id dot value. Okay, so this is coming from, if you go have a look at this result that we're getting, so each user, we get the ID and we get the value as well. So we can give that as a unique ID, So the key will be user id.value. If you save and if you go, the error is gone. Okay, so that is how you can fix that error, which is an easy fix. And finally, let's not show all this button on each users, doesn't make sense. So let's fix that up. Take this form element and let's put on top here. Okay, and let's create a horizontal line. Okay, so we have a div, we have a form, one line, and then we have all this. We're loading the users. Okay, now we have 5 users. If I load, let's go to React. Okay, we got 5 users. If I load the users, it becomes 10. We get 10 users. If I load, get 15, and so on. Beautiful. Now we are nearly done with React basics. Now we will learn more when we are working with Laravel and React all together. All right. I'll see you in the next section. Thank you. Now that you have understand the basics of React.js, you should go ahead and try to build a full stack project. How about building a complete social network where you will learn to build your own API using Node.js and you will build the front end with React.js. That sounds exciting, right? So here in Udemy, I have another course. You can search for React Node and go a bit down, and currently my course sits here, but hopefully by the time you're watching this, it might come on top, and you can see it's just released and I've got few ratings, only 4.1, but hopefully it will grow up, right? So here this project covers everything from scratch, and this complete social network has pretty much everything you want to learn. It has authentication, authorization, prod, so users will be able to update their profile, they will be able to create posts, there is relationships, likes, comments, and not only that, you will also learn to deploy it to the cloud hosting as well. There is so much more. Just have a look in the preview video. Okay, so this covers pretty much everything you would want to know. So take your skills further and enroll into this course and build a complete social network. Okay, so another thing I would like to show you is, as you can see, this is the price for this course. However, if you apply this coupon code I give you, this one is called Node React. Okay, so all capital letter, Node React, and if you apply, as you can see, it's currently 14.99, but once you apply, you get 94% off, and it's the price you pay. Okay, so this is the absolute minimum you can pay to get this course. Okay, so if you want to expand your knowledge about React, then you should definitely check out this course. This course will make you a full stack web developer from absolute scratch. Okay, so if you're interested, make sure to apply this coupon code so that you pay the minimum price possible. All right, thank you very much for being part of this course, and I hope you will find me in some other courses as well in future. All right, thank you.